Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this special lecture, The Sri Lankan Ramayana Tradition, the Interface of Sinhala and Tamil Literature and Folklore, which Thiru Justin Henry will deliver momentarily. Ramayana is a pan-Asian epic which can't be confined only to Indian subcontinent. It's a pre-classical text which has literary, religious and cultural significance. Apart from some mainstream versions of Ramayana, there are several versions of written and oral or performative Ramayanas in almost every Indian and South Asian languages. These Ramayanas are studied by some renowned Indian as well as Western scholars. For instance, a notable study in this field is Paula Richmond's Many Ramayanas, the Diversity of Narrative Tradition in South Asia. Ramakatha Utpatti Aur Vikas, written in Hindi by Camille Bulke, is also an important work. A.K. Ramanujan wrote an article 300 Ramayanas which sparked many debates. Today, Dr. Justin Henry will speak on the Sri Lankan tradition of Ramayana, which is no more only a literary text. Now, let me introduce Dr. Justin Henry. Dr. Justin Henry is currently the Bhagwan Padma Prabhu Endowed Assistant Professor in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of South Florida, USA. He earned his PhD in the History of Religions from the University of Chicago Divinity School in 2017. He has published on aspects of Sanskrit, Pali, Sinhala and Tamil literature in Sri Lanka and South India. His first book, Ravana's Kingdom, The Ramayana and Sri Lankan History from Below, was released by Oxford University Press in 2022. He is currently working on a general audience book on the many Ramayanas of Asia, as well as a monograph project on Jain, Hindu and Buddhist attitudes towards wealth acquisition, philanthropy and business ethics historically. In this occasion, we would like to thank Professor E. Annamalai, who introduced Dr. Justin Henry and his book to us. Before moving on to the lecture, I would like to invite Professor Thiru Chandrasekaran from Special Center for Tamil Studies JNU to felicitate the speaker by presenting him the 3 volumes of English translated Tirukural compilation. Now, Dr. Justin Henry will give his book Ravana's Kingdom, the Ramayana and Sri Lankan History from Below as a present to Special Center for Tamil Studies JNU.
2019, they said that they brought all of these scientists together and determined that it was Ravana, not the American Wright brothers. Ravana, King Ravana, who has invented flying. Invented flight, right? This is in the Sri Lankan Air Force Museum in Ratmalama. This is Ravana's flying peacock machine, his jet. And in June 2009, sorry, this was a video also, but in June 2009, Sri Lanka put its first research satellite into orbit around the Earth, Ravana 1. And the satellite is Ravana 1, their first research satellite, right? Yes, so this is, okay, so this is what's happening in Sri Lanka since 2009. And there are really sort of 2 questions here, two big questions that come out of this. One, Ravana, he is not the hero, he is the villain, he is the bad guy, right? So why do these Buddhists, not Hindus, Buddhists, why are they looking to the villain of this Hindu story, Ramayana, and they are exalting him as the Veera, the hero, right? So this is question number 1. Question number 2, where did this idea come from? They already had this story, Mahavamsa, Vijaya Parampara, okay. Where did all of this Ravana, where did it come from? How did they imagine this in the first place, right? So those are the questions that I want to answer today, these 2 questions. And the answer to the first question is that, well, it's the subject of my book, actually, so you can get all the information there. But there was this idea for a very long time that there are many, many Ramayana traditions in not just India, but all throughout Asia, right? So there are famous, even Buddhist versions in Thailand, in Cambodia. There are even Jain versions in India, even Persian versions. But people said there is no Sinhala Ramayana. So many scholars have said, Buddhists, they did not care about Ramayana. There is no Sinhala Ramayana. So the point of my book is to say, that is not true. Sinhala Buddhists also liked the Ramayana. They just didn't have any one single very famous version of it. But they liked the Ramayana. There are many different small Sinhala Ramayanas. And if you look at the Sinhala text, some of which Professor Damodaran has looked at for his dissertation, you find many stories of Ravana in Sinhala Buddhist texts. And there are these stories of the maps of the island from Kandyan period, maybe 500 years ago, that say, this is the place where Ravana had his jackfruit chips made, and this is Ragama, the place where Ravana had his toddy, his alcohol made. And various legends of Ravana all around the island. There was, in the 16th century, even an entire kingdom called Sitavaka, right here, this part of Sri Lanka, Sitavaka. This is the kingdom of Princess Sita. And when you look at the poem describing the origins of this kingdom, they say that Ravana had the blood of the noble people of Sri Lanka collected in one pot. He had the blood of 100 noblemen collected in one pot. And he had the pot buried in the ground. And from this pot, Princess Sita has come. She's come out of this pot on the ground, right? So this is a Sinhala poem, 16th century Sinhala poem. Many, many examples. I don't have time to go through all of them, but there are also quite a cluster of local folklore and legends, especially in the mountains of Sri Lanka around here. So Sri Pada is the very famous mountain, the fourth tallest mountain in Sri Lanka. It has this giant footprint at the top. The Buddhists say that it is the footprint of the Buddha, that he flew over to Sri Lanka in Mahavamsa time and stamped his foot there. Hindus say that it is the footprint of Shiva, and Muslims say that it is the footprint of Adam, right? Biblical Adam, because in some of these 8th, 9th century Arabic texts, they say that Adam was pushed from heaven by God when Adam and Eve, they ate the fruit. God pushes them out of heaven, which is like a celestial realm. They fall to earth, and Adam, he lands right here in Sri Lanka, Sri Pada. This is why it is sometimes called Adam's Peak, and the Ram Setu is called Adam's Bridge, because also Adam walks here to India, eventually Ayodhya, from Sri Lanka. So there are many legends of Ravana also in this region. People say, especially around Nuwara which is a big tea plantation place, and many Tamil speakers from India brought here. There are stories that this is where Ashoka Vatika, Ravana's pleasure garden, where he kept Sita captive, was here in Nuwara. Many stories. I don't have time for these examples, but the point that I want to make right now is where did the Sinhala Buddhists discover these ideas? How did they come to Sri Lanka? Where did the Sinhala Buddhists acquire these ideas? Many of you, I'm sure, how many of you have read the Lankan Ramayana? Everyone has read Lankan Ramayana, right? So you're all familiar with Lankan Ramayana. Probably many have read Valmiki Ramayana. There is Lankapuri. Is it Sri Lanka? Is Lankapuri Sri Lanka in Lankan Ramayana or Valmiki or Tulsidas? Is it? Yes. You think yes? How many people think yes? How many people think no?
All of us think yes.
All of us think yes.
We call it Ilangai.
Yes, but in Valmiki, he says that Nala's bridge is 100 yojanas. 100 yojanas. 100 yojanas is 800 miles. Yeah. So 800 miles to go from India to Lankapuri. Sri Lanka is not 800 miles away. I mean, the descriptions of Lankapuri, they say that Lankapuri is on top of Trikuta mountain, right? Which is this big inaccessible rock in the ocean. That the actual city of Lankapuri is several dozen miles in each direction, this high walled fortress, right? There's really nothing in Kamban Valmiki to suggest that Sri Lanka, it really is Lankapuri. It seems some sort of mythical place. But from early on, even if it's not there in the most famous, well-known literature, obviously, just ordinary people by word of mouth understood Sri Lanka to be Ravana's Lankapuri, right? Even in Ahananuru, this famous Tamil Sangam poem, we have this one verse where Rama, he's planning to go to invade, to conquer Ravana from Venver Kaurian Polmurukori, which we understand to be Dhanushkori, right? Which is the end of the Ram Sedu near Rameswaram in Tamil Nadu. So this is very early on, 2,000 years ago. There is in the Sinhala literature, the text that I'm describing, also this idea that Ravana's Lankapuri was very, very large, 12 times larger than current Sri Lanka. And that after the war with Rama, because of the adharma of Ravana, the gods have come and they've created a great tsunami. And they have reduced the size of Sri Lanka. So now it has shrunk to become very small, but in Ravana's time it was very large. Right? And there is also in Nakiranar's famous commentary on Irayana Hapapurul, there's also the idea of the three sangams, right? The original Madurai, which is contracted, and the Kaparapuram, and then Upper Madurai, these three sangams that are gradually each reduced in size in South India. So they're both in the Tamil tradition and later on in the Sinhala tradition as well. In the Sinhala tradition, these texts that I'm describing in the Sinhala Ramayana, Ravana is more of a positive character. He's shown as being more of a positive character, right? He is presented as being justified in abducting Sita because of the violence that was committed against Shurpanaka, or even in some of these stories, it's Rama, not Lakshmana, who has assaulted Shurpanaka in the Sinhala stories. That of course is not there in the Tamil, but from the various from very early on, from 1300 years ago in Akbar's Padihams in Sambandar in Sundarar, there is the idea of Ravana as a great Shiva Bhakta, right? So Ravana, he remains the villain of the Ramayana, but he's also a great devotee of Shiva, and we of course have the Ravana Anugraha Murti, right? The image of Ravana who is being pressed down under Mount Kailasha by Shiva's toe, who has to take the tendons out of his arms and cut one of his heads off to make a veena, to play music to Shiva to be released. Very famous image in Tamil temple imagery, right? And some positive aspect about Ravana. Ravana as a Shiva Bhakta is there early on in the Indian Tamil tradition. One which is magnified in the Sri Lankan Tamil tradition. Ravana is remembered as the founder figure of a number of Tamil Saiva Kovils on the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. And famously at Koneswaram temple in Trincomalee, there are stories of Ravana being a truly great devotee of Shiva. His ailing mother wants to worship Shiva one last time before she dies, and Ravana takes one slice of the rock at Koneswaram to bring it to his ailing mother so that she can worship a small portion of the Ten Kailasa, the southern Kailasa, which is the peak where Koneswaram temple is. So many stories about Ravana as a positive person there in Sri Lankan Tamil literature. And some of these early 500, 600-year-old positive versions of Ravana in Sinhala literature have to do with an attempt to diminish the divinity of Rama, because these are Buddhists we're talking about. Buddhists believe in the gods of the Hindu pantheon. They have temples to Vishnu, to Murugan, even to Ganesha at the Buddhist temples in Sri Lanka. But all of the gods, Vishnu included, Rama included, are only there under the deputy or under the permission of the Buddha. The Buddha in Mahavamsa, he has given permission to these gods to watch out over Sri Lanka. So they're all really sort of subordinated to the Buddha in what the Sinhalese call the Deva Sasana, or the pantheon of gods beneath the Buddha. So part of the reason why Ravana becomes a more positive character among the Sinhala Buddhists surely is this attempt to cut Vishnu down to size, to diminish the divinity of Vishnu through Rama. But part of it also is, I will argue, very direct influence from Tamil to Sinhala. There are places where it seems very probable, but other places where it is very explicitly stated. So in the appendix to my book, I do translate the closest thing that we have to a Sinhala Ramayana. It's a probably 17th century text called the Ravana Katava, the story of Ravana. It's in Sinhala. And it's the Ramayana, mostly from Ravana's perspective. And there are many positive things about Ravana in it. He's described as having great punya. He's a protector of Sita. He saves her from drowning at one point. And interestingly, he does not die in the Ravana Katha. So Ravana, he has this battle with Rama. He's injured, but he survives. He goes on to live in Nurelia, the tea country in Sri Lanka. He has not been killed. In this text, at the very, very beginning, so in Sinhala, the author of this poem, Ravana Katha, he says, well, the Demla Adru, which is Tamil Acharya, like the Tamil teachers, the Demla Adru, the Tamil teachers, now we know very little of what they knew. So although I cannot give the long Ramayana, Kamba Ramayana, I will give a short version instead. So he's really saying here very directly that the stories that we know about Ramayana, so this is a Sinhala Buddhist in Kandy, he says we learned them from Tamil teachers. Right? There are a number of texts actually that say the same thing. Purana Demla Adru in Sinhala, Purana Tamil Acharya, the old Tamil teacher. Several other texts as well that say it. And what did this author derive from these Tamil teachers or Tamil stories? In Ravana Katava, the Sinhala Ramayana, there is one episode in which Hanuman is captured by Ravana's forces, and he is taken to Patala Lanka, underground Lanka, subterranean Lanka. Patala Lanka, yes. And there he is tied up, and he is taken to Mahakali Govind. Actually, the text even says Govind. He takes this, and they say, okay, Goddess Kali, it's puja, it is puja time. And they leave Hanuman there to be eaten by Goddess Kali. This is something that's not there in Valmiki Ramayana. It's not there in Kamba Ramayana, but it is there elsewhere, right? Including famously in Mayal Iravan Kadai, which, how many people have ever heard of this story? Mayal Iravan Kadai? No, you have, everyone knows, okay. Yes, I gave this talk in Puducherry 1 year ago, and people did not know. You know it, okay. Yes, I mean, it was once, must have been a very famous story. It's in Tamil, but there are other versions in many other languages. Even Hindi has some version of this, the Airavana story in other languages as well, which is basically an extension, a sort of extension subplot to the main Ramayana story. It's this episode before the invasion of Lanka, when Ravana requests another younger brother of his, Peacock Ravana, Mayal Ravana, to abduct Rama and Lakshmana. And so Hanuman, he knows of the plot, and he makes his tail into a giant coil, like fortress coil, and he puts Rama and Lakshmana inside. But Mayal Ravana and Peacock Ravana, he takes on the disguise of he takes on a disguise, and he's able to get through it into Hanuman's tail and abduct Rama and Vibhishana. And Mayal Ravana is the king of Patala Lanka, the underground Lanka, which is accessible through a giant lotus stalk somewhere in the Southern Ocean. So the drama of the story is that Hanuman must go to Patala Lanka and rescue Rama and Lakshmana. And when he's there, he finds his son, Matyavallapan, his son, Hanuman's son, and his sister, Turandikai, who assist him. Turandikai is a secret Rama Bhakta. So they assist Hanuman in saving Rama and Lakshmana from the Kali temple. Also, Mayala Ravana is going to sacrifice Rama and Lakshmana to Bhadra Kali here. So this he does, and he has to, he saves them, and he has to defeat Mayala Ravanan's life force. His Uyir is in these giant 5 beetles, bugs, that Hanuman has to go and smash to destroy the life force of Mayala Ravana. Anyways, a very famous story, the subject of the 3rd ever Tamil film created in 1918 was Mayala Ravanan, so a very famous story for some time. And very clearly, the author of Ravana Kathala, the Sinhala Buddhist author, knew this story. Yeah, very clearly knew the story, and he incorporates a little portion of it into his poem. Yes, and right. So I have more evidence in my book. Obviously, I don't have time to go through all of it right now, but it is there. Right. So that's the answer to one half of the question. Where did the Ravana images come from? Many of these stories, the folk stories about Ravana's Ashokavartika and so forth, were preserved by word of mouth in oral tradition. Some of these texts also people still have in private collections that they've pulled up, and they've been placing things online, just amateur people writing things on Facebook and blog sites and so forth. So this is where the content, the basis, the foundation for the Sinhala Ravana business has come from. The second half of the question, why? Why in 2009 did the Buddhists discover that they have come from Ravana? Why do you think? What happened?
The war.
The war. I agree. Why? Why especially the war? That's the reason.
Yeah, there are so many debates around this war. One thing that it was an invasion of Aryans over Tibetan. This is considered to be Aryan king.
Yeah.
Ravana supposed to be the king of all the Vijay race. That's the reason. That's one of the debates that we have in this country.
Yes.
About this
Yes.
2009.
Yes. Well, now the Sinhalese are saying we're not Aryan or Dravidian.
Yeah, exactly.
We are Sri Lankan. Actually, they have a special word. They say in Sinhala it's Yaksha Gotra. This is Yaksha Gotra in Sanskrit, right? They say that we are from the Yaksha tribe. They do not consider Ravana or Rakshasa. They call him Yaksha for historical reasons. But they say, no, we're not Aryan. We're not Dravida. No, we are Yaksha, Sri Lankan. Yes. So I think it's right. It is the war. I mean, what actually happened in the war? I was there. I was there in April, May 2009 when this all happened, and everyone was going out in the streets and lighting fireworks, and Prabhakaran is dead, right? We defeated it. And the story in the news media that the Sinhala Buddhists were saying was, we have done something that even the Americans could not do. We have defeated terrorism on our home soil. On our mother country, Malbima is the Sinhala mother country. We have defeated terrorism. Even the Americans could not do it. We did this amazing thing. We did something that no other nation has ever done. And there was this moment of very, very intense national exuberance, victory, intense Buddhist nationalism. And the idea, the old idea, this 1,500-year-old idea that the Buddhists were Indians from Bengal or the Himalaya, no good. No, we are not Indians. No. We are Sri Lankans. We've come from Sri Lanka. Our history is very great. We've gone back 8,000 years to Ravana's time. So there was this kind of psychological need for a bigger, better, indigenous account of where the Sinhala people came from. Where did they come from? There are all of these Ravana stories, little stories all throughout the island. All of a sudden they were activated, really, in 2009. And how? Maybe some of you have heard of, well, you know, of course, Ramayana Express and Ramayana Trail. So now Modi is trying to make a trail from Ayodhya all the way to Rameswaram, right? You can take the train and do the Ramayana tourism, right? And also in 2009, the Sri Lankan Ministry of Tourism had diplomatic engagements with India to create Ramayana Trail Sri Lanka, which still exists, actually, it's still a thing. They say that there are 50 locations throughout all of Sri Lanka where Indian tourists can come and see the places where Rama felled Ravana, where Sita was kept captive, right, where Hanuman got his Sanjeevani plant and all this so forth. Right? So it's there. So there is some orchestration of this at the very high level of the government through Ramayana Trail, but only a small amount. Most of this Ramayana stuff really came about very informally. Online, on Facebook, there are many, many pages with hundreds of thousands of followers of Yaksha tribe, Ravana Parampara, in Sinhala, right? At least Sinhala Buddhists who are sharing these stories, amateur people these are not college professors, no credentials at all, who are calling themselves historians. Some of them go on TV and say, I'm Professor so-and-so, not Professor anything, I'm not Professor anything. And they go on television and they say, I'm Professor so-and-so, and I have the manuscript of Ravana Katava at my house, and it says that Ravana had great Pushpika Vimana in Sri Lanka 8,000 years ago, right? On television. So these are just ordinary people doing this, and it is what I refer to as a public, crowd-sourced rewriting of Buddhist history, right? It's really just everyday common people who came together, who shared these ideas online and in popular media, and who, in the course of really 10 years, I mean, we're now 14 years on from that, but in the course of a decade, rewrote the history of the Sinhala Buddhist people. And so, there's a lot to say about this. In my book, I talk a great deal about populism, because we're in a moment of political populism. India, Sri Lanka, US, also Donald Trump, right? Populism, power to the people, rejecting the elites. We don't want any elites. And in Sri Lanka, also the same. The Rajapakshas are political populists. They're very anti-elite political populists, right? Mahinda Rajapaksa, he wears this brown, it's called a Kurakkan colored scarf that is meant to be the millet of the grains that the people of South Sri Lanka had worked very hard to grow their grains, and they eat everything themselves, right? There's political populism, but there's also information populism. There are people who come together to say, we do not need university professors to tell us what history is. We can tell us ourselves. We'll do it ourselves, right? This is information populism. So this is the point of what I have to say, that we are now in an age, this age of online information populism. Now with ChatGPT and AI, maybe that's finished and the robots will just write our history for us, right? But anyways, in the last 14 years, anyways, we had a period of online populism when ordinary people were doing things like rewriting the entire history of a nation and an ethnic group, right? So at least we got to see that little window. So, so that's my answer to all of this. I should say some things that are not depressing. I don't want to take too much time. So anyways, hopefully it's interesting. I'll say some things that are...
Should take a break for 5 minutes?
Do you want to finish it? Maybe finish and then we can do like Q&A or something. Is that good?
He's missing in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Or even one time, garlic is taken have it.
No.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, sure. We can do it. Or we can take a break. It doesn't matter. How long do you want me to go?
No, you'll take 10 more minutes?
Sure. Yeah.
I think we can.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'll say a few good things, anyways. Right. So. Okay. Right. So this is the new Sinhala history from Ravana. There are, however, some people, scholars, activists, artists, who are aware of what's really going on, Sinhala Buddhists, I mean, who are aware of really what's going on, and have tried to make use of this Ravana excitement to try to teach people about the truth, which is multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and multi-linguistic history of Sri Lanka, because that is the true thing about this, right? So I give some examples in chapter 6 of my book of people who have tried to instrumentalize Ravana to teach people about this. So there's one Ravana Aviation Kite Association that invites people to Colombo Gullface Green to reimagine Ravana's Pushpika Vimana and also to what they think it would look like, and they have a kite flying contest and talked about Sri Lanka's multicultural history. This was also a video, but it was a Tamil Kutu style modern play written by Subramaniam Vidyanathan in 1965 called Organises. So this is an old play, but it was brought back to life by a gentleman named Sinhala Maunaguru, who is professor of the fine arts faculty at Maktab Kalapu University, Batikalo.
Sri Lankan Tamil or
Sri Lankan
Tamil?
Tamil. Sri Lankan Tamil. Yes, yes. Organises. So he Professor Maunaguru has brought it back to life in 2010, and since then performing it throughout Sri Lanka. And it's really kind of meant to be, it's a sympathetic treatment of Ravana, but also a cautionary tale about war. And it emphasizes how Ravana's ego interfered with his decision-making, and the idea that he should have paid more attention to Mandodari, his wife Mandodari, and the women in his life. He kind of made so many mistakes. But it's also a sort of general commentary on the tragedy of war and follies of ego and pride. And yes, just another miscellaneous example. A friend of mine, Suresh Mantilaka, who is the professor at Peradeniya University, he's a dancer, and also this is supposed to be a video of his performance of the story of Ravana, which he did during a COVID online performance with a group of Indians doing different versions and vignettes of the Ramayana. And he plays Ravana, who has woken up here in 2020. So in the Ravana Katava and other Sinhala folklore, Ravana is not killed. He lives on. Sometimes he is knocked unconscious by Rama's arrow, and he falls asleep in the mountains of Sri Lanka. So this is an old, centuries old conceit in Sinhala folklore. And in Mantalaka's play, Ravana wakes up in 2020, and he sees that people have assigned him all of these identities, Tamil, Sinhala, and so forth. But really, he is beyond these sort of identities. Okay. Yes.
Oh, I'll just take.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes. So, I have, of course, many more things to talk about, but maybe we should take a break and then we can just do question, answer, discussion. Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Break time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Whether you have that Kutu text or a visual.
I do. Yeah. I can get a recording for you if you like. I have it on DVD.
One of our guys is doing in the same. That young base, he's the one that's doing
right.
whatever, that's the interesting thing. So whatever that, apart from this production, already in the villages of North and East, we have many performing traditions based on this story. I don't know the different textuality. Sometimes the text is different from the. What I mean is sometimes it's one of the many Ramayana. So we don't know that, but we have the tradition.
Yeah.
So many performances, especially in the east of Sri Lanka, and also in north also. So that is one of the thing I'm thinking. So if there are any differences, so but apart from the Tilkoneshwaram and Tirkediswaram, because Tirkediswaram sliding, that's arrow, So in Tamil areas, that's not much heard about the temples or related with Ramayana. Maybe you may know it because but popularly in North, I'm sure, damn sure, that's not that much of
not in the north, but in the east though. So I think from Koneswaram and also Batikalo. So my information from Koneswaram, I spent time reading the Takshina Kailasa Puranam and Koneswar Kalvette, which is a little bit later. And there you have it, right? This idea.
Yeah, that I know. Ravana, there's a rock.
Yeah, the
Ravana.
Yes. So
and also this is very interesting. Your interpretation of the recontextualizing Ravana, the way you spoke, that is very interesting. But the question is, you just use the word southern Sri Lanka. I think you need little bit, not the whole southern, actually deep south, because the deep south in the sense of where Rajapaksa families already brought up, because that Huracan actually the symbol of that side only. So that is a kind of the polarity between the Canadian Sinhalese and the Karawal Sinhalese. So that quality is there. So this line may be from the Karawal Sinhalese or the so this Naik, this so that Sinhalese maybe.
The Ruhuna Rata.
Ruhuna, yes.
Yeah,
exactly. Ruhuna,
yeah. So yes, that's another thing. Yeah, for of course. Sri Lankan audiences would be tuned into that, and you're exactly right. And the Raja, but that is part of their popular too, right?
So that is a very interesting point because this is another bipolarity between the Sinhalese, the hill country or Canadian or elite Sinhalese and the Rukun Sinhalese.
Yes, and of course neglects the irony that Mahinda and Gotavaya's father was Don Alvin Rajapaksa, who was also a member of parliament, right? So it's not, so it's not like they are not elites. Yes, so a lot of great questions. The reason why I neglected the Dravidian movement and Ravana's importance in Tamil Nadu is because, well, I ran out of time. But in my book, I do discuss it. And you're exactly right. There is a very deep irony in Sinhala Buddhists of the 21st century claiming Ravana as their ancestor, having defeated these Tamil separatists. Because the Tamil Dravidian movement of India 100 years ago from the 1920s already claimed Ravana as their ancestor, right? So it was kind of like really a little bit of a minor theme, but S. Purnalingam Pillai wrote this book in 1928, Ravana.
Even during my school time also, the religious assignment, we always say Ravanan Veda the Niru. So that is there.
Yes, it was this minor idea, and what was that guy's name? Kulandai Pulavar wrote some Iravana copy of Ravana Savya in the 1940s, and some little works around then. Yes, so it's very ironic that the Buddhists would say, no, Ravana is ours, and one kind of interpretation of this is that, I mean, the Buddhists perceive themselves in 2009 is having won a kind of total victory over the LCCB. And of course, the army occupies all of these Tamil lands in the north and in the east, right? Turning them into Buddhist hotels and so forth. And we can kind of interpret their appropriation of Ravana as one more spoil of war. One more spoil of war, right? We're taking everything, including Ravana. He's ours now, right? It's deeply ironic. I don't think that very many Sinhala Buddhists really know about the Dravidian. They don't really know about the subtleties of the Dravidian movement. They have ironically used texts like Purnalingam Pillai's Ravana the Great as evidence for Ravana's historicity. I think neglecting the irony of the fact that this is part of the Dravidian movement 1 century ago. Yes, and in terms
so if there are any Kerala kind of, because it is Sitawak actually, Kota Kingdom, so they actually belong to Kerala. That's a Chera designs actually. So now they claim as a Sinhalese, that's a different thing, the political thing.
Right.
But so Sitawaka, you mentioned the place Sitawaka. So Sitawaka actually Kota Kingdom. Kota Kingdom is a Malayalam kingdom basically.
Yes. I don't. There's of course a large discussion to be had about literary transmission between Kerala, Malayalam, and southwestern Sri Lanka. In terms of specific stuff about the Ramayana, I really don't know, because also the theme of Sita being in some sense a daughter of Ravana, whether it's a literal daughter or whether Ravana has done some ritual or collected some blood and put it in a pot and Sita emerged from it. That's nothing unique to Kerala. You find that everywhere. It's even there in the Ramkian, the Thai Ramayana. It's a very common story that somehow Sita is actually
Indonesian Ramayana.
So
yes.
I want to two more questions.
Yes.
So the Vibhishana is one of the guardian deity of Indian.
Yes.
So that actually happened around the 17th, 18th century. So what is the relation in between this Ravana cult and how they, because in Tamil side we don't have any Vibhishanan temple or Vibhishanan cult, right?
Yeah, so we actually find, so the Kelaniya Vibhishana temple was actually attested in Kote in the mid 1400s. So we have a number of these Sandesha Kavya in Sinhala, written in the mid 15th century. And all of them have a root from the Vibhishana Kelaniya Devalaya to the temple to Pulvan in Matha. Pulvan is a local version of Vishnu. So it's one bird, a messenger bird, flying between these two temples. So Vibhishana is there for quite a long time. I think that, so he's one of the guardian deities, the Lokapalas really of Sri Lanka, Vibhishana. And my hypothesis for this is that Ravana, he appears here and there, little stories, Ravana Kapala and so forth. But there's one god who was never admitted to the Deva Sasana or the Buddhist pantheon. There's one Hindu god. And that Hindu god is Shiva. So Shiva, he's never a guardian deity. You don't see the little Shiva Kovils on Buddhist temples. And I think really that this is because we're talking about competition and antagonism between Buddhist monks and Temple Saiva temples. That is the main competition, right? So they're always competing. The Buddhist monks are always competing for patronage, and their biggest opponent is really Shaivism. I think it's Ravana's association with Shiva that kept him as this very sort of minor figure, whereas Vibhishana becomes a great Ram Bhakta, and Rama is allowed. Rama and Vishnu, they are allowed in the simple Buddhist pantheon, so long as it's understood that they are subordinate to Buddha. So I think it's Ravana's association with Shiva that prevented him from becoming a deva. Interestingly, there have been some Ravana devalayas, Ravana temples, built since 2013 on Buddhist temples. Actually, two that I know of. One in Colombo in Pandapitya, the Deva Vihara, and one in Ratnapura, in the Saman temple. And there was even, so this was like about 10 years ago at this point, but they went so far as to have Sunday Ravana Puja. We're talking about Buddhist temples that do Ravana Puja. So this is all very, very new. I don't think that it's really, that it has really expanded to a broader phenomenon. But it did finally happen. It took many, many years, but it did finally happen.
I think maybe the kind of inclusion and exclusion happening there. No, so because he asked one question in between, so they worshipping Vishnu, there, but not Rama statue or Rama's idol. Never. So kind of selection are there. But kind of so Vibhishana, not that, and everything. So what you meant is Sri Lankan Ramayana is correct. It has its own selection and inclusion and exclusion.
Yes, not so much Rama, not so much Rama. Definitely Rama's not a hero. And for Professor Padmanabhan, I had this discussion with him maybe 7 years ago or so when he was just talking about some of this Naga stuff. And it's fascinating, it's not an area of my own expertise, but it seems like there's a lot of stuff there in the archaeology and epigraphy. And you're exactly right that doing archaeology like that reminds us that these identities of Sinhala, Tamil, right, what have you, so much of it has stuff that has developed over the centuries, but may not have been so relevant in antiquity.
You are asking about Langa, the word Langa, no Langa. So I also know more about that, but the Professor Indrabala, the eminent historian, he mentioned that the word Langa is not belongs actually Dravidian linguistic, so Aryan one, but that's a Munda. So because of that, what he like to mention is the Mundas are the ancestors of Sri Lanka, rather Tamil or Sinhala. Even for his scholarship, he said that Tamil and Sinhala language also later on.
Yes, and that's correct. I mean, linguists agree on that. Lanka, it's probably the Munda word for island, actually. So yes, it's all very important to remember. And in my work, I'm really looking at stuff from the 14th, 15th century. I'm not an ancient historian or an archaeologist, but even back in the 14th, 15th century, these Tamil kings of Kotte, who give money to the Buddhist temples and who have these Buddhist monks write these prashastis about them. What language do they speak at home? a lot of them spoke Tamil at home, right? So how can we say that these are Sinhala Buddhist kings, right? They speak Tamil at home.
Always the queens are from Madurai.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you don't have to go back 3,000 years,
Yes.
right? You can go back 500 years and see who was a Sinhala, who was the Tamil, right? Yeah, it's much more tendentious. Yeah.
Interestingly, this A.K. Ramanujan's 300 versions of Ramayana, and there's another book, Paula Richmond,
Yeah.
questioning Ramayana, also very powerful. Where in fact, I was shocked to know from a taxi driver somewhere near Haryana. I was going to Sonipat. It's not very far from there. On the way, he stopped. He asked me, "Do you believe in Hindu gods?" I said, "No, but I don't mind saying." Then I said, "You are from South, right?" He's identified. He said, "Yes." "You are from the country of Ravana." I said, "Not really, but yes, Ravana happens to be from south of this subcontinent." He said, "Ravana is not from Sri Lanka or from Tamil Nadu. He's from Basoya, my village." He showed me the temple. Said, "I want you to visit it." He was born here, he was brought up here, and this is where he came. There's nothing like Lankapuri, Lankeshwara. There's one point. Other point that you raised is that Buddhist interpretation. Same thing happened in India too. The status of Deva to Ravana, even in Tamil Nadu, is not worshipped as God, it is worshipped as cult. Not exactly like Sri Lankans. So how do you see this? So same, it's the influence of my substantiating your point. I don't know.
I think so.
So is it the same tradition that continues, or because you're trying to say it is Sri Lankan? It is Adam's peak, it is Buddhist foot, or Ravana's foot, right? But you have in Dhanushkodi Rama's foot.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So it is pitted against each other.
I think that there is probably much more universal about the kinds of Theravada Buddhism that you find in Sri Lanka. Much more is universal about Indian religion in general. Probably than Sri Lankans would like to admit. I think. Yes, and I mean the idea is Ravana a Deva, or is he a hero king? It's also worth pointing out that in Sri Lanka there is the process of divinization of historical people over time. So in Anuradhapura in the North Country, there's this great king, Sena, who was the builder of many of the tanks and the hydrology of Anuradhapura. And there are some now small devalayas that worship him as a god. And so he was a real person, right? But he has become this kind of divinity over time. So there is, I think, this kind of fluidity between actual real historical people. Maybe they have some monument made at their gravestone or what have you. People come and make offerings, they make wishes or ask for funds or boons or something. And then over time, a cult of a historical person can become a cult of a deva, right? So yeah, I think that's certainly something that we would find elsewhere throughout South Asia, not even into Sri Lanka. And it shows too the sort of permeability of the boundary of being a king and becoming someone who's an object of veneration, even to the point of doing weak conclusions. Yes, and there are many. You said that was in Haryana, your example.
Basoya is a place.
Yeah, it's all over the place. There are some people. There are the Bir Asura people in Jharkhand.
Yeah.
There are people in Chhattisgarh. There are some people in Madhya Pradesh who they look to Ravana as a great ancestor of theirs. And it's kind of interesting that when you start to see it in one place, you start to see it in many, many little places too. So it's there in India. But interestingly, usually among sort of like marginal people, like Dalit people very often, and people who tend to be quite sort of like marginal in terms of the major social scheme. Yes.
He's also claimed as a tribal god in quite a lot of like marginalized sections of this country. Mainly tribes claim that he was a tribal god.
Yes.
He's from the hills. Right?
Yes.
So they identify Ravana as one of the tribal deities.
Yes. Yes. And if we're sort of thinking broadly about the broadly about the sort of semiology or symbolic distinction that people draw. I mean, if we're going to treat Rama as the big king of North India, then it sort of makes sense for people down here, Malnad, Sri Lanka, people who see themselves as marginal in some way to the major castes and political scheme of this part of India. It makes sense that they would say we are in opposition to these people, the Rama people up here, right? So Ravana becomes kind of a sort of natural figure, a natural symbol to rally around if you are sort of placing yourself in contradistinction, in opposition, in tension with the North Indian religious caste, cultural orthodoxy. In Sri Lanka too, much of the discourse in the Sinhala Ravana movement is about Sri Lankan sovereignty. We are a sovereign nation. The United Nations Human Rights Commission cannot tell us what to do. India cannot tell us what to do. When the Indian peacekeeping forces came to Sri Lanka in the 1980s, even some of this Ravana stuff started to come up then. Even back then, 1980s, early 1990s, people would say, no, Ravana is coming to eject the Rama and the Vanar Sena of the Indian peacekeeping forces. We will eject them, right? So even this idea of Ravana as in opposition to the army in India, it's always there, just beneath the surface.
What has happened to the project that they launched, Silicon Gum, since you were there? As they said, if whoever finds any kind of evidence of the existence of Ravana's Pushpaka Vimana will be given some millions of dollars.
So that they put this advert in the Colombo newspapers, and I think it was June 2019. And,
yeah, it's 2019.
And the Civil Aviation Authority said that in 1 week they had 100 responses. They said, please give us any manuscript, books, ancient evidence you have to reconstruct Pushpaka Vimana. They said 1 week they had 100 people send their evidence.
So what happened to the project?
Well, so they have not yet produced the Pushpaka Vimana. They call it actually Dandumana. That's flying heat They have not produced. No. However, I think the more significant thing is the Ramayana Trail, which they launched in 2008, 2009. And that actually, so I was doing some research for my book. I have some photos actually from when I was doing this. That was doing very well. So if you go to Norelia at the Sita Mankovil in Norelia and various other places, there were many big buses of Indian tourists every day going through these temples. It was doing very well. They had several 100,000 Indian tourists coming to Sri Lanka every year. Then in April 2019, there was this bomb attack by an Islamic extremist sleeper cell. And the tourism just ended overnight. Then we had COVID, then we had the financial crisis. And so Sri Lanka, I'm going to Sri Lanka next weekend. So Sri Lanka, that what actually had been very profitable. And I think part of the successful Ramayana Trail, still that has not been reanimated because of all the problems Sri Lanka has experienced since 2019. Yes, no pushback on this.
You told Ravana Katha is written approximately 15th century?
I think it's most likely a 17th century text written in Kandy.
Whether you have gone through the Indian versions of Buddhist Ramayana, Jainist Ramayana, and whether you could compare the thing, and also further, rightly Agilan said that we, after the Dravidian movement, we also have our own Dravidian text on Ravana Kavyam. You might have known about it. Ravana Kavyam.
Yeah, that's Kulanda.
So yes. Whether this Ravana Kavyam of Tamil text, we would like to know about it because we don't know about these Buddhist versions. If we anyone throw a Kurandai card impact from that Buddhist whether.
Yes, so that is my second book that I'm writing now. I'm trying to write a book on the many Ramayanas for publication here in New Delhi, actually. So I'll work on that, and It's more than anyone could write. I learned there are 23 Persian Ramayanas. Persian. Muslims, right? Yeah. Yeah, and yes, the Jains also. This is a whole thing. This guy Gregory Klein's. If anyone's interested, this guy Gregory Klein's just published a book. It's available online for free from Routledge called Gregory Klein's Clindes at Trinity University.
What's he called? A Prati-Narayana. He's like an anti-Narayana. But he's still a great Jain king, and he gives money to the Jain people, to the Jain monks and so forth. Several Jain Ramayanas, of course, many Buddhist Ramayanas, as you say, in Southeast Asia. I learned there's even one Chinese and Japanese Ramayana. So now I'm trying to write actually a general audience book. Really, my point there is that I want to talk about interesting deviations from the essential story of Valmiki, Kamban, Tulsidas, because in the many Ramayanas, there are some very interesting retellings, epilogues, variations. There is, I don't know if you know this one, the Satakanta Ravana Kadai, right, which is an epilogue to the main Ramayana, where Sita, Rama, Lakshmana are back in Ayodhya, and Ravana has yet another brother.
Is it a ballad? Is it a ballad?
It's a prose. It's actually a prose work. Yeah, prose work. He's another brother, Ravana, with 100 necks or 100 heads, and he's out in this ocean in another Lanka, further south in the Southern Ocean. And this time, Sita says, when she learns that 100 neck Ravana is coming to destroy Ayodhya, she says, Rama, you did the battle last time. Last time you did the battle. So this time, please allow me. And they take Pushpika Vimana, they go with Hanuman and Lakshmana, and they fly to the far south Lanka. And Sita takes the Rama's bow, and she rappels down to the Lanka with Hanuman, and they kill all of the Rakshasas with the many heads, 16 heads, 32 heads. Finally, after 9 days, they come to Satakanda Ravana, and finally Sita is the one who kills him. So this is, of course, very different from the conventional Ramayana, because Sita here gets to be the heroine. Right? This is one story, and it's several centuries old, right? That we don't hear about, but that was obviously compelling, important, interesting to some people. So what I'm particularly interested in my ongoing work are those Ramayana stories that have significant differences from the major story that we're most familiar with.
And here, that picture, what went for? I just have a picture.
So this, I believe,
yes,
this was the only picture I could find. I believe that this is from Amish Drupadi's Sita, warrior princess of Vidya. I don't know. Do you know Mr. Amish? Yes, he's very famous. What's that?
Yeah, he has written the trilogy.
Yes, the trilogy. Yes. It was the only picture of Sita as warrior I could find. Unfortunately, someone will have to make a better picture. Yeah.
This is not my area. This is maybe from my analysis, but I was asking. If we suppose the people from Sinhala people are Sinhalese, they are showing different partiality or hatred by considering what is it, Ravana as their indigeneity, they are showing that hatred. Then how they are taking Rama, the product, how they are dealing with that antagonist?
Well, yes. So there is some tension here, because the Buddhist majority government really wants to use Ramayana to make money. The Ramayana trail is a good way to make money, and they have made money. They need to be nice to Indian Hindu tourists to say, here, go to the nice Hanuman temple, or go to Sita temple. And they have actually made a lot of money, right? But the Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka, they're very strong Sinhala nationalists. They were actually some of the ones who were very much in support of the Sinhala Ravanas. There's this one famous Buddhist activist group called the Bodhivala Sena. Yeah, and there's another one called Ravana Bodhivala Sena. There are several groups, Ravana Balaya. This is a political activist group made up of young Buddhist monks who call themselves the forces of Ravana. And so at some of these places on the Ramayana trail that the Sri Lankan government was advertising, they said, okay, well, we're going to get some Indian tourists, and we're going to build a new Rama Mandir. This happened at this small town called Divirumpura, which is about an hour south from Delhi. And so the Sri Lankan government said, okay, no problem. Indian government will pay some money, we'll make Rama Mandir. And the Buddhist monks protested. They said, no, 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 no. We must have Ravana Mandir first. Only first. Only then we can make a small Ravana. So there has been this tension, right? Where the government just wants this to be this diplomatic thing. They've even talked about Ram diplomacy between India and Sri Lanka. And they want to keep things nice and cool. But the real sort of Ravana enthusiasts and activists like these Buddhist monks, these internationalists, they have in some cases come out and
I
protest.
think this is not only for the sake of tourism, also the political thing, because they want to present Indian government.
Certainly, yes, there is. Yeah, I mean, there is an epilogue to this also that there's the supposed king who was. There are these prophecies of this king named Diyasena. It's a long time. I'm writing a paper about this now, but I don't know if you've heard of this, Ahilan, but this king named Diyasena, who supposedly in these palm leaf manuscripts, some king will come to save 2,500 years after the Buddha, will come to save Sri Lanka. And now since 2018 in the media, there are all these people, these astrologers coming up on Facebook and YouTube and saying, actually, this Diyasena king, this great king, he is Rajapaksa. And also, not only that, but he is future Buddha Maitreya. Future Buddha Maitreya, and not only that, he is Bodhisattva, and not only that, but also, he is Ravana reincarnated. Yes. So he is Ravana reincarnated, Redeemer King Diyasena, and then in the distant future he will be Maitreya.
What's the population during Ravana? At present in Sri Lanka, how many people? There's any
roughly,
yeah.
So I unfortunately don't have any empirical data. I would say that from having lived, I lived in Sri Lanka for 5 years altogether, since 2005. And I would say anecdotally, from going around with auto drivers in Colombo and talking to people and giving lectures, I would say a majority of Sinhala Buddhists believe the Ravana. And it has come into some school textbooks also. So you see it in government publications. So it was getting official status recognition. And even some people are learning about it in classrooms in school and so forth. So yeah, it became a real majority in a very short time.
So if that's the case, Buddhists have already appropriated Ravana.
Yes.
Politically and legally.
Yes.
Yes. So I don't know, I've never visited Sri Lanka. Do these monasteries, what do you call Pakka Buddhist, the fanatic, do they have these idols in their temples?
So there were these two, what they call devalayas, which are like these little temples attached to bigger Buddhist temples. That was really, I think, kind of a novelty, like it hasn't expanded beyond that. There is some very weird sort of underground cult stuff that really I was kind of like invited into, and I was warned by my friends, don't get involved with that because these people are insane and you're going to find yourself in trouble. But I know though that there is some like underground Ravana worship, and also associated with that martial art called Angampura.
This Angampura actually, based on the Canadian records, Canadian kings only invited people from this, what you call in Tamil Angampura, this martial art, Kalaripai people from Tamil Nadu. So the Canadian king only introduced Angampura.
Yes, there's also Varmakalai, right?
Varmakalai and Kalaripai is more popular in Kerala than
Kerala. But this Canadian king brought some people from Tamil Nadu that time, 17th century.
Yes. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a complicated question.
No, I'm just a curiosity.
Yeah. So the actual like at-home Ravana idol worship, it's there, but it's very underground, weird stuff. It's associated with this martial art thing. This word Angampura, so it only appears a few times in some Sinhala texts, including Raja Valya, 17th century chronicle. It sounds there like it's a form of like wrestling that was performed at
Mostly like present day Kerala martial art.
yeah,
This-
like coloring.
Yeah.
So we have this word. We have some Sinhala texts that talk about esoteric forms of fighting and these like what are they called? The kalai, the vital spots around the body that you can press. We call them pressure points.
Yeah,
acupressure.
Yeah, acupressure. Yeah, there are these like texts that they're clearly related to stuff in Malayalam and Tamil. They're in Sinhala. They do exist. Now, over the past 12 years, there's all these people, the Sri Lankan army and the Air Force, they now have training teams in Angampura. They have these training facilities where people go, and they say that this martial art that they have with these swords and these weapons and all these things. So far as I can discern, what people call Angampura today is really derived from Kerala and Kalaru. I think it's really something that's been reinvented over the past 12 years. There's this guy named Ajanta Mahanparachi, who's a dancer in Colombo, and he's published this book and he goes and trains people in the Sri Lankan army and so forth. And this is my hypothesis. I know that he went to Kerala. I know that he studied coloring there. I think he really just took it and made his own version, right? And he calls it Angampura. But he tells this elaborate story about how it was preserved underground through the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British, that it was outlawed by the British in 1818, that they knew about this ferocious martial art and they put a law against it, right? And it was preserved, again, in the deep south, actually in southern Ghana, in rural south, by just a few number of practitioners who transmitted it. And now this guy, Mahandar, actually has discovered it and he's made it public. So it's kind of, it's a complicated thing. What people call Angampura or body combat today in Sri Lanka, I understand to be a pre-invention, mostly derived from Kerala.
Well, to be fair with the debate, I think they have every right to reimagine the lost glory. There are so much of retellings of
Yes.
Ramayana and Mahabharatas in India.
Yes.
Sri Lanka is no exception.
Yes.
To be fair with the kind of debate that is on, anyone can take it up and then say kind of appropriation of misappropriation.
Yes.
Call it. So Sri Lankans do have that right to do this because it belongs to none.
Sure.
Because there's no authorship of Ramayana, Mahabharata.
Of course.
Right?
Of
So
course. I agree, but I think that there are more and less socially aware and politically responsible ways of taking up the Ramayana.
Yeah.
Because some people are taking it up in ways that are empowering to women, empowering to low caste people, right? And some people are taking it up in ways that just reinforce political hegemony. You know? And so some of the Buddhist, the Ravana Balaya people, they're not thinking hard about the ways that they can do this more responsibly. But of course I agree with you.
Was they intended to make altercations in Ramayana based on Ravana? You say previously mentioned they don't have an exact text belong to it. So what they are agreeing is the particular text belong to it. Because they can't accept the defeat. Ravana couldn't be defeated, no? According to their
Yes, so there are a number of Sinhala Ramayanas, but they're very, very obscure. They do not circulate very much. The closest thing we have to the Sinhala Ramayana is the Ravana Katava, which, as I said, is probably a 17th century text. I did a critical edition, actually, in translation of it from Sinhala for two reasons. One reason is that the name of this text people knew. So there was this one old man who called himself Miranda Obiasekara, would go on television in Sri Lanka. People confused him with the great anthropologist Gamanath Obiasekara, who was in Canada. And they would say, oh, the renowned anthropologist Miranda Obiasekara is here to tell you about Ravana Katava. And this old man who had some obvious mental health problems. And he had this text in gold plates that describes Ravana's misats and his flying craft and so forth, and he'd be on television rambling about this. So I felt it was incumbent upon me to actually translate this text and show that there's no missiles or flying craft. So that's reason number one. And reason number two is that it's really the closest thing that we have to Sinhala Ramayana. There are many, many copies. So I've looked at some in the British Library, different libraries of Sri Lanka. It's the closest thing we have. I think that the fact that there is no canonical Sinhala Ramayana in the way that you have come up in South India, the way that they have Tulsidas in Hindustan, I think that that itself has allowed for very multi-form storytelling, for people to tell different stories all throughout Sri Lanka, to make it their own in different places in Sri Lanka. The fact that there's no one real central canonical text. And so I think that you're exactly right to say that it's really the fact that Sri Lanka is unique insofar as there's no one single Ramayana that everyone knows that has led to the diversity of the tradition of the way that we have it. And the second part of your question, have Sri Lankans coalesced around the new Ramayana for an invention? The answer is not really, because some Buddhists want to take this to the ultimate extreme. They want to say, sorry, I don't have my photos up, but at the Devram Vihara in Panditaki, they have this Ravana temple, this Buddhist Vihara. They say, oh, Ravana, he was a great king. He was also a Buddhist. He was converted by Buddha Kashyapa. The previous Buddha took out Buddha Kashyapa has converted him, and they have this mural. I wish I had my photo of it. They have this mural of the Buddha Kashyapa converting King Ravana to Buddhism. Right? And so some people, they want to take it to the absolute furthest extreme to say, yes, he is this great Sri Lankan Buddhist. And for other Sri Lankans, it's just a little too silly because none of it makes any sense. Right? Kashyapa Buddha was millions of years ago, but it's not. So it's been hard. There hasn't really been one single new Ramayana. Because, yeah, different people tell the story different ways.
Racing towards Ravana, how do you view this thing, automated or electric?
Ravana ultimately, boy, yeah, right. Yes. I had to do in December, I was in Sri Lanka. I had to do a television documentary where I am guide to the Ramayana traditions of Sri Lanka. On screen opposite Apar Shakti Purana, this Bollywood actor. And they asked me this question. They made me sit down after this is the last day. They made me sit down and they said, all right, we're going to film you now. Say what you think about Ravana. And the best thing that I could come up with was that I think that, one thing about Ravana is that he's really kind of the most complex and cosmopolitan character in the Ramayana. He's very intelligent, he's very learned, he knows the Shastras, right? He has very good and loyal aspects to his personality. But he also has this obsession, right? He can't let go of Sita. He wants to make Sita fall in love with him. He's also a great musician. He's a great Shiva Bhakta, right? He's very learned. He has all these positive attributes, but it's really his ego that leads to his downfall. There's no reason he couldn't have been a perfectly good provincial Uparaja. Right, he could have been a perfectly good regional king, right? But he has this obsession that he can't let go of, right? And it leads to his death, his tragic death. So he's this kind of tragic character. And my answer that I gave on screen, I don't know if they're going to come. I'm going to see it in Mumbai Friday. I don't know if they're going to keep it or not. But my answer was that I think that Ravana is a good cautionary tale for all of us, right? And so when I think about myself, I know that I have these tendencies towards obsession, just like Ravana did. But I see that he was killed for this reason, and if I can just let go a little bit, if I can be less obsessive, less egoistic, right, less prideful, maybe I can learn something from it. So anyways, that was my TD answer.
So what is the reason behind the Sinhalese Ramayana to bring Sita to Sri Lanka? What is the...
Yes, interestingly, right, yes. Here in these texts, I'm talking about texts that are 500, 400 years old, Kandyan period texts. These Sinhala Buddhist texts, they say that actually it was Rama who started the fight, the altercation with Shurpanakha. And it was Rama, not Lakshmana, who cut off her nose. And so for this reason, Ravana really was justified in going there, right? Like it was all Rama's fault. The blame all goes on Rama. In one such text, this is a Ramayana story that appears in what's called the Kumbha Kankarya corpus. This is Kandyan dance, the Kandyan dance that they perform. If you go to the traditional dance in Sri Lanka, there's these texts that explain what's going on. There, also, there's this addition where finally Sita is safe in Ayodhya, and goddess Uma, Parvati, comes to visit her and says, "Oh, you spent 9 months with Ravana." What does he look like? And Sita finds a banana leaf and a piece of charcoal, and she draws a sketch of Ravana. And Uma says, "Okay, very nice, you're very handsome." And she leaves, and the sketch falls under Sita's bed. Rama comes in later that night. He sees the little piece of paper sticking in the bed. He takes it. He says, "Who is this?" This is Ravana, right? And he throws Sita out into the wilderness, right? And this is how she ends up going to Valmiki's ashram and so forth. But there's this kind of implication in the text. It doesn't say it explicitly, but there's this implication that, oh, actually, Sita liked Ravana. Ravana was okay. So those are. So yes, there are all of those plot points in these Sinhala versions of it that downplay Ravana's goodness and elevate it.
There is a Ramayana in Maithil region, Mithilanchal in Bihar, where what you said is absolutely there in the text, that she was in love with Ravana.
Yeah.
She, in fact, drew him, what you call kolam, the rangoli, the colorful one. So in only one morning, fine morning, before the sun rises, you're supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Kolam. So she drew unconsciously Ravana's picture, face. And before Ram came, Surpanaga, effaces it. And that's how this guy comes to know, Lakshmana and others come to know that she was in love with Ravana before she fell in love with Ram.
So that's from Bihar. What's the
That's what
name of that text?
it's there in questioning Ramayana.
Oh, okay.
We get
You
the-
can see this in Madhubani area.
Madhubani.
Madhubani. I have been there for a while.
There's in Rajasthan area also, Mandodari. There's a place called Mandodari.
Yes, yeah, that one I know.
It's mainly, they had Ram in the Madhubani area.
Yeah.
People had Rama.
Yeah.
Because he deserted Sita in the forest. That's why it's the birthplace of Sita.
Uh-huh.
It's supposed to be according to the text.
Right.
So Sita is worshipped there, but Rama.
Right.
So there is because of that, later he deserted her in the forest. That's the reason people told us. So in the folk lessons, they are only Sita, not Rama.
Right. Yeah. So but that's really interesting though that you have the same parallel.
That's how
parallelism.
they named there, the Sita Ram, not Ram Sita.
Sita
Ram.
Ram. No.
Actually, you have you have Sita Ram. And, there are songs in Madhubani, Sivan area where they speak Bhojpur area, where there are folk songs where they really insult Ram in their folk songs because he suspected her of her chastity.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean there are also there are women's versions of Ramayana too, and ones that are more sympathetic to Sita, who receives less than sympathetic treatment in some major versions. Certainly, yes.
Questions? Anybody? In your long journey, very long journey in Ramayana, the absence of author, you just said there is no canonical text of Ramayana or even Ramayana, if you want, in Sri Lanka. Ramayana is quite famous in Tamil Nadu also. Periyar has really contributed to some of the achievements of Ravana. He has written one more version of Ramayana with his own style. But that's in protest against Hinduism.
Yeah.
So that's not fit into this one. But anyway, with this absence of authorship What is the present claim of Rajapaksa, who sponsored the whole stuff? Who's the author that he claimed that? So you have mentioned so many guys coming on TV channels, anthropologists claiming that it's I who invented it. I mean, I who introduced this Kalipa. I introduced Ravana. Buddhist monks, there are several Senas that are working. So where do they stand? How do they fit this guy here?
Well, I think that's actually a good, kind of really a deep point about this, because the Rajapaksas really have stepped back and allowed others to make these claims about them. So before, people were calling Gothabaya, this Vyasena and Ravana and Maitreya Buddha and so forth. They were saying that Mahinda Rajapaksa was a reincarnation of this King Duttagaman, who ejected the Tamil and Lara from Sri Lanka in the 1st century BCE. And who was making these claims? Well, it was these people who were astrologers, who said, there's one man named Sumanadasa Abhigunawardhana, who is the astrologer to presidents, who tells you what time to go to war and so forth, and all of these things. Right. So really, I think the Rajapaksas have done a good job of allowing others to speak for them, right? And there are always sycophants waiting in the wings, willing to say whatever to make the Rajapaksas happy. And I mean, the other point is, where do these texts like Ravana Katha actually come from? Well, we have this man, Miranda Obiasekara, who was on television. He says that his golden Ravana Katha was a family heirloom and passed down by the Obiasekars for generations, right? There's this one monk up from some small temple near Anuradhapura named Reverend Manave Vimalaratana, who claims to have discovered this text in his temple library called Varna Purikal, which is in the language of the ancient Yakshas, not Sinhala, not Tamil, ancient Yaksha language, Yakabhasa. These people, they say that these things are there, that they're hundreds, thousands of years old, that they magically discovered them. What do we believe about this? Miranda Obiasekara, he says that he has the golden plate Ravana Katha. It reminds us very much of the Mormon religion in the United States, when this man Joseph Smith in the 1820s said that an angel named Moroni brought him to a tree in Palmyra, New York, where I'm from, and told, dig under this tree and you'll find the golden plates that say that the lost tribe of Israel came here to the Americas. And he digs up the golden plates and he creates an entire new religion, Mormonism. I mean, how likely is it that the golden plates are real? Joseph Smith or
so can we say this way? There's a collective psyche of Mahavamsa mentality.
Collective psyche of Mahavamsa mentality. I think it's a collective rejection of Mahavamsa. I mean,
no, I am not literally connect, but
right.
The mentality of the hegemony of.
Yes, so I think that's it, because Mahavamsa is a real text. It was really written by this monk named Nama, probably in the 5th century. It actually exists, right? These other texts, they're just came out of the ether. These are not great monks or great scholars. These are just random people that you meet at the bus stand. They're just, who are these people?
Mr. Tompkins is talking about this one in the God Delusion. Jason, what's Smith?
Joseph Smith. Yeah.
The finding that the golden plate under the tree in New York. Exactly.
Yeah,
So have you seen that?
Well, he lost the plates, unfortunately, but he had 12 witnesses. But I think maybe the point in the conclusion is that if you have people who are willing to believe, you will have people who supply the content of that belief. So in 2009 in Sri Lanka, people are just waiting for a new history of the Sinhala. What is our history, right? Vijaya, India, no, we're not. Tell us something more. And you have these people who said, okay, I'll tell you. Here you go. I found these golden plates and here's the story. And people say, oh, that's great. So I really think it's if the imagination of the people is primed, if they're receptive. Also in the 1820s, all this religious excitement in upstate New York, where I'm from, the second great awakening, people are ready to hear a new message of Jesus Christ. And Jesus going to give it to them. He gave them the entire new Bible, the new gospel of Jesus Christ, right? People were ready to hear it, and he took advantage of it. Very good, right? In Sri Lanka 2009, people were ready to hear a new history of the Sinhala Buddhist people. There it is. Let me tell you, I'll supply it. If there is the demand, there will always be the supply. If there is the demand, there will always be the supply. I think is the point.
Yes, shall we close the
Yeah.
program?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Justin Lee. It was a very wonderful session. Now it's time for ending the program. I request the Kamalakaran Research Scholar of Tamil to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. Sorry for the intervening because we have to conclude this program by before 5:30, so we are concluding. So, first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Shantishri T. Pandit. Really, she is interested in participating in this function, but due to her various commitments, she couldn't join with us. So next, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor E. Annamalai, retired professor of University of Chicago, who is acting as a catalyst. His moral support helping us in making our department leading to progress. So next, I would like to appreciate Dr. Justin Henry for his patience, who have taken out his time among his busy schedule and given an excellent speech in the title, The Sri Lankan Ramayana Tradition, the Interface of Sinhala and Tamil Literature and Folklore. Next, I would like to thank our department faculties, Professor Damodaran, Aravindan, and Dr. M. Chandrasekharan. Then I would like to thank all the faculties from other departments, especially from Francophone Studies, Professor Ajit Khanna sir, then Agilan sir from School of Arts and Aesthetics, and scholars and my friends from various departments from English and all other departments. I thank you all on behalf of Special Center for Tamil Studies. Now we are concluding this program. I hope we will all meet at one another different occasion. Thank you all. Thank you.